The justice response to sexual violence. Hello everyone, welcome to Signposts for Living with Dr. Kirsten Hunter, and we have got Suzie Holt here. Hello.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Kirsten Hunter.
Kirsty. I've been really wanting you to come along and do a podcast with me for 2 years.
Oh, well, I'm so sorry, and I'm so grateful just to have this conversation with you. And also, I love what you've been doing with our community, and I hear such beautiful things about all the people that you've been seeing, but also what you do at a broader level, which is exactly what we've been talking about prior to getting on air, about our community and how we are driven to make it a better place for people. Absolutely.
And I'm a psychologist, and I get to help people on a one-on-one, and family basis, and I also do public speaking on mental health issues. Don't like it, but I do it. And your background is social work come into politics.
100%. It's an interesting thing because I reflect on social work. So I actually did a Bachelor of Social Work, and social policy was a huge part of my degree, and I loved that element of what social workers can do in terms of activating legislation or taking it to that next level. And in some ways, I think our own professions have a role to play in looking beyond what we did on a one-on-one level and say, we can actually influence policy in a huge way, partly because we're listening to people and their issues every day. So we actually have I think back to what I did and what you're doing, because we're getting that knowledge. I think sometimes I encourage my own colleagues to actually take it to that next level, because sometimes I think we have that responsibility to actually say, we can actually influence policy, and we're getting it, so we actually can do that. And it's actually quite empowering for your clients or the communities to see you to take that next level. So here I am taking that huge leap into going, right, we're going to go and stand and be a politician and advocate on behalf of your community, which is what we did as, it's very similar to social work or psychology and advocating.
Yeah. And, when you're making systematic change, I think of that, good old triangle, the systematic change at the bottom. And it's a reflection of what the needs are. And so how can you do that unless you've really spent some quality time with people to know exactly what those needs are? And it really has to have a beautiful mirror, response. And
beautiful. Actually, I love that. Actually, that's a really beautiful way of putting it, Kirsten, because it is about going out and asking your community, well, actually, what are your needs? We can do it really simply. I think sometimes we complicate politics and we lose track of actually what we're there to do, which is actually there to represent the people.
Exactly, yeah.
When you go down to Canberra, it's the people's house. So it's actually about people. So when you go out and ask, well, what is it that you actually need? That's the first thing I often ask is, I'm going to put it that way now because that's really clever. It's actually, well, what is it that you want? Can you just give me one example of something that you would like to see changed in our region? And it might be sometimes people give me really positive things, which is terrific.
Yeah.
But often they'll just say, I really want this. And it's actually really lovely because you're listening. So it's all those beautiful skills we have of listening and saying, you know what, I feel like that too. I'd really like to see change. And, I'm always surprised because people will often have the solution sitting there. So it's as you would know when you're seeing people in counselling, they know the solutions.
And they'll often have quite a clear opinion of what they think would value add for themselves or the community, but no one asks them.
No. I have a beautiful story, and I'm a talker, so I apologise if I'm talking too much.
That's why we're here.
I know. I'm a talker as much as I am a listener. Because it is listening, that's what we're doing all the time, is listening. But beautiful story of a friend of mine who's a GP, and she'd never been asked her opinion about politics before because it was a no-go. And Queenslanders do have that thing that we don't like to talk about certain topics. And I remember I said, just tell me, just give me one thing you'd like to see changed in our region. It's always amazing what people will sort of tell you. And then I love that concept, which comes back to where we started about social work. Well, how can we look at that legislation, or how can we go down and advocate for that, and where does it fit in? So it's bringing it back to those legislative changes to say, you know what, we can actually do this. We can find a way forward, which has been amazing to see it like that, rather than just saying, you know what, we need this building or we need this sort of thing, which I'm all for too. But when you bring it back down to some simple things, they're things that we can do.
Do you know what my answer would be? What I would say?
So, Kirst, I'll ask you.
Yeah.
Let's do what I would. I think this is great.
We're on the street now.
I know. So I've done a lot of kitchen table conversations.
Love it.
So, g'day, Kirsty. How are you going?
I'm great, thanks, Susie.
How have you been today?
Yeah, great.
Yeah. You know, I'm running for politics. I'm an independent. And one of those things is that I really want to hear and listen to the community about, you know, what changes they'd like, and if you had an opportunity, what would it be, and what would you like to see change? So here it is.
Love it.
Give it to me. You know, what is that thing that you'd like to see change in our region for the better?
Well, it's not a small ask. What I would love is for there to be a specialised domestic violence task force in the police, so that when there were DV calls and they needed to have the police attend, that it's police that work only in that field, and they're specially trained and they have the resources to attend, and that would be really great for a very in tune group, and, you know, police that have chosen that path, so that they're with a mindset of wanting to be there rather than feeling a bit burnt out being brought up to another DV case. And then the domestic violence cases wouldn't saturate the main task force and demoralise the police, which I know that they are quite demoralised because there's so many DV call-outs. And then there'd be more resources to deal with the huge insurge of youth crime, for example. And they'd be able to tend to the more, you know, typical historical role of the police force. So I think there should be two task forces, and there isn't at the moment. General duties attend all of the above, and it's saturated by a DV. That's what I would wish for.
Wow. I'm going to ask you. So I agree with you wholeheartedly, because we've been out listening to the community, particularly people like Adair Donaldson and the DV Centre and Praddy Place, and also the police, when they're seeing the huge numbers coming through. I think they do something like 60 call-outs a day. It might be more than that.
It's huge.
It's huge. Can I add one more?
Yeah.
So I'm really driven to see that there are trauma-trained judges and specialised units for victims, but particularly for women, which I think would also help. So I'd like to take it one step further. So, Kirsten, do you know we could actually work together? So this is how a policy can change and how we can think about it from the region, because you're not the first person to suggest that. And I think
I'm sure not.
When you've got, you'll probably know the number, how many women have died this year from domestic violence.
I'm terrible at stats. They come and go out of my brain. But it's scary.
Huge.
It's quite terrifying.
It's
and
huge.
The percentage that happen within the home from known people, it's scary.
It's huge. I should know that stat off the top of my head, but it's just so, I think it's nearly 60 or over 60 at the moment.
Really?
So some significant things need to change. So something that we should do, and what I would like to see happen, is that I always take a regional lens to that. So we could own that. So something that our community could say is, yep, this is a really great idea. I can see already that down the track we could work together to start implementing those things. It's just creating that change and going down and saying, you know what, in Canberra down those hallways, this is what we're hearing. We have the solution. Let's find a way forward and start negotiating for that to happen.
That's wonderful.
But I think it's a wonderful idea, and I'm sure your listeners out there, many of whom have experienced DV, and certainly many of the people that I'm working with have experienced DV, they would support that sort of...
Absolutely.
And that's why I love what we're doing, because we're an independent. We're not bound by party politics. So listening to the community specifically on those issues is such a priority.
Can you explain where you sit in politics? Can you explain what your role is with regard to politics? Because there's different levels And can you explain where you sit?
Yeah, so I'm running for the federal seat. So I want to get down to Canberra to advocate for our regions, to advocate for the very thing that you've just suggested, which would be extraordinary if we could pull up. And straight away I'm going to say...
Profound game changer.
Part of the role of an independent is to listen to experts in the field like yourselves to say, well, here you are, you've got the knowledge, let's build that task force together and start actually pulling it together to see how we can change. But politically, we're here to represent the community, so we have no party. We're a community independent, so we're listening to the community, and we've run around values. So our campaign is set around some strong values within the, you know, we believe in science, we believe in integrity, we believe in entrepreneurship and innovation, and we believe in representation. So we want to actually have better local representation and to be a representative for Groom, which is our electorate, and to take that down to Canberra. So we actually want to say we want to have a seat at the table, and we're not bound by those party politics.
I was going to say that as an independent, you truly can come and say, okay, this represents our community, this represents Groom.
100%.
As opposed to I'm obliged to have this, party policy, I guess. Is that right? That's
exactly right. So you're actually taking to the community saying, well, what are the issues and what are the priorities for our region? And then you go down there, and that is your role as an independent, is to advocate on behalf of your region.
Yeah.
So things like just what we've talked about, that would be, I see it, and what we're hearing is that it's a huge priority. So straight away, once we're elected and get over the line, I'll be really positive and say, yeah, we want that change.
Absolutely.
In 2025. Sorry, that was me knocking.
Yeah. So the election's next year, is it?
Next year.
Do we know when?
Oh, probably after March.
Okay.
But we start meeting with those relevant people in Canberra. So your role as an independent is one, it goes back to actually what we're talking about, social worker there. So you're to advocate on behalf of your community, and you're to work collaboratively with the government of the day to create those changes for your community. So it might say, right, we want, say we're looking at a building for what we're talking about. That might be something simple. We might start doing say we could do a feasibility study. We want some funding for that feasibility study and get that process going, negotiate things with the treasurer, negotiate things, because you're not bound by any party politics. You're actually truly going down there to represent your community. Something that we've been doing, which is a really good example, is that I've been working with farmers out at in our electorate actually, and they've been really concerned about their businesses and their farming and the longevity of, they want to pass these farms down to their kids and the next generation, and they're really keen about food security and water security and their own business. And agriculture brings, here we're talking about ag but it's a really good example. And so ag brings around 1.26 billion to our region through not just to the farm gate. It's actually all the associated industries around agriculture, so it's quite huge. So we went out there and started listening to the community, who are really desperate because some of these farms are going to be impacted by coal seam gas. And so they're not anti-gas, but they are anti-gas on prime agricultural land.
Yes.
So we went out there, started listening to farmers, listening to the community. Then we held a symposium out there. We got 200 people who turned up.
Great.
The biggest thing that we were able to do was to get bipartisan support. So we had the major parties there, and we used it as an education tool. So we brought people and experts from across the nation to just speak. And then we had farmers who got up and just shared their stories.
Yeah.
What we were able to do from that was to work together to build a policy change that they would like to see, and they all agreed. So we had unanimous support for an amendment to a bill that they would like to see happen, which would just be extraordinary if we could get that change. It would just say, yep, we want to protect this small. So prime agricultural land is this tiny bit of land that we have left to provide food. And out there they've got these beautiful soils. And who thought that as a social worker I'd be talking about soils? But here we go. The things that I've learned being in politics, which I love. That's the beauty of being...
Well, you're a pragmatic person, so...
That's the beauty of being a community independent.
Yeah.
You learn about things.
Yeah.
So really short, could talk it forever about it, but we were actually able to go down and work with lawyers to say, how can we actually get this amendment up and going? What could that amendment look like? So we started doing that now. So we actually were able to define what we really wanted, and then we went down to Canberra to start knocking on doors with those parliamentarians from all sides of politics to say, listen, we've been out there listening to our community. We want to protect our food security, water security now and for future generations. This is what we're after. We actually want this legislative change. Are you going to help us and support us?
Yeah.
So the fact that we have been knocking on doors already and trying to get that over the line, we proposed at a conference with around 1,000 people. I threw it to them. I said, would everyone support a minister for food? And it was unanimous.
Really?
Yeah.
It's pretty logical, isn't it?
So it's actually that's what an independent can do. So you can start negotiating. Actually, it comes back to, so food security is not just around ag. It actually comes back to what we were talking about before, Kirsty, because one of the things that I'm really concerned about is we've got DV, but we also have a number of these kids in these families who have no food. About 1 million kids go hungry every year in Australia.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So when you talk about food security, we're not only trying to secure food for...
it's disbursement of
yes,
food.
100%. It's actually that flow-through effect that we want to make sure that people have food on the table.
Yeah.
But also, we could actually go a long way feeding the world globally. So it's sort of that simple approach, but actually quite broad.
Profound.
And
profound. I mean, what do we need to survive?
100%.
Food, water, shelter.
Quite simple.
It's one of the three.
Yeah, and, when you start talking about stats, one of the things around, I heard an incredible stat is that 85% of people with mental health issues have often come from unhappy families and they have no housing. So everything is related.
Yeah. Big ripple effect.
We can't solve everything, but you know what, we can actually go down there and give it a good hard crack and work together to try and create those changes. And I think you're right, once we start addressing those things, it is that flow-through effect.
Incredible. And to see current systems, legislation that isn't working, and instead of sitting and saying, well, there you go, it's a case of, oh, hang on a minute, what are the pathways? And having people like you who you're an agitator.
100%.
You're a listener and agitator.
Yeah.
And that's extremely, exciting. Very exciting.
Well, thank you. I'm excited because I think that the regions, if you look at, we've all been in the regions for a long time, we miss out a lot. And
when you say we miss out a lot, what do you mean by that?
I think the regions, I look at regional, I've worked in regional, remote and rural Australia all my working life.
Right.
I have a passion for the regions, and I think sometimes we get forgotten.
So the metropolitan getting more of a focus.
100%.
Yeah.
So when you look at DV or issues around consent or even the farmers, we've always got to have that lens. It's from the region. So we really want that regional perspective being represented down in Canberra, which
Absolutely.
I think at times gets lost within a city-centric focus. And that is a beauty. Regions often also have the answers to things. You've just provided a huge solution today to something quite significant in our community because we're used to having to get on with the job. And I think when the majority of the resources in Australia come from the regions, it's time actually that they were represented well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really love having a very broad view of the situation and a very educated, compassionate view. No Band-Aids, no quick fixes.
Yeah, no.
If you think about that suggestion of having a DV-specific police unit, I guess, we talk about caring for the carers, and the amount of police that I speak to who are burnt out and are demoralised because they say, well, I didn't sign up to spend my whole day going to DV. I want to go and do other work. And they're not choosing to do that work, so that's a bad match. You're having someone attending a situation when they're feeling obliged and resentful, actually. and burnt out. So, it's the multiple, the layered consequences of making good choices and how that could ripple out. It's very exciting.
Actually, even when I was working, particularly out west, a lot of my client work was with the police or the service providers, and I think you're right, we forget about those. Actually, a stat that really worries me is, because I come from health, is that the number of young people who are doctors or interns who actually commit suicide, and it's because of the lack of support that we have around or fearfulness around those things. So I think you're right, to come back where we started, to have trauma-enforced care and trauma-enforced service provision, even changes. So those legislation changes that we could actually start to think about, that flow through would be tremendous.
Yeah, it would be on all levels. Mm-hmm. So, what's it like being in Canberra? Tell me about that. I've been a tourist around the city. That's it.
Well, it's an interesting place actually to go down, and I mean, I still pinch myself when I go down there, because I think, this girl from the bush, or this girl who, and here am I walking the hallways of Canberra advocating for our community. You do hold the shoulder, like you're carrying the weight of your community at times to go down there and advocate.
You're the representative.
So you're quite driven. So I actually get really focused, and all those skills that we've used, those negotiation skills and communication, and I've got to be a bit assertive here because I really want to get this over the line, but we're going to do it with this empathy and compassion. It's actually quite positive, because I think if you've prepared to work and collaborate, I can see that changes can happen. So actually, someone said to me something really funny, which you don't often hear. So, and I'd love to talk to you too about this, Kirsten, is that I'm a big thinker, so I think big, which I know drives a lot of people insane.
It's wonderful, yeah.
And I think we've forgotten that we can actually think big.
Yeah, that's pioneering thought.
It is. And I was talking to a policy advisor, and I said, look, I have a bit of an idea. I think we could make this happen. And they said, we're not used to people with big ideas. And in Parliament? In Parliament.
Far out.
And so I think that it is sort of exciting to see that we can go down, have those big ideas, but also because we've done our research, we've talked to people like experts like yourselves, or we actually have the knowledge, and we've come with our bag of tricks that we know what we have up our sleeve, that we can actually go in and start collaborating. So to walk the halls of Canberra, because you're on a mission to deliver for your region and you want an outcome, you're just going down there to fight. You're fighting for the people who you have listened to, who you want actually something better for in our region. Very similar to when you're working with a client one-on-one and you're trying to advocate for them in a system. I know, like you, we would fight tooth and nail to make that person get a better outcome. It's the same thing. You're going down to Canberra to advocate for your region, to deliver for your region, and to find something, that pathway forward, so we can have a better outcome.
And if you have seen over time that this region has been forgotten and not really had that voice, or that the spotlight, it must be that much more exciting and infuriating to think what could be done if we did have that.
100%.
Yeah.
It would be exciting. I've interrupted you, Kirsty. I get really excited because I think that there's so much opportunity that we just are missing out.
Yeah.
And because I'm going down there to represent Groom, I'm not going down to make friends. I'm going down to do my job, which would be to advocate for our region and what we need. I mean, I'll have friends because I love, talking to people, and you do need to have friends everywhere, but you're going down there on that mission. So it's actually, you're right. I think because we have missed out, you're going down there to fight hard, which is what, we've been taught about. Maybe that comes from my background of, I come from a very simple family where we've had to fight for things all our lives. I was in a car accident. I've experienced families and DV, and whether that's that fighting spirit that comes through that thinks, you know what, we can actually do this, and I want, to find, I don't like being backed into a corner, so I'll always find that path forward to get what we need.
And it sounds like with your background, you've had to fight for what you've got, so then you don't presume that things should be handed to you. You presume to take up the mission, take up the charge.
100%. Yeah. And I think that is that skill set to know, I'm not just going to sit back, because I know you've got to go out there and find it if you want it. There's always that pathway forward, and so it's navigating that process of, well, who can I work with down here to start getting those changes, and who's going to be sympathetic to what we want, and how can we advocate and collaborate to get that over the line.
I love that we've got to talk about the community focus, your background with politics. Absolutely, I wanted to know all of that. So it's wonderful. And now we're going to come down to the focal point of sexual violence.
Yes.
So the justice response to sexual violence was our starting point, and within the framework we've just speaking about, now let's talk about this topic.
100%. So it's very similar to what we're talking about, is that we've heard and listened to the community that we want to see changes, particularly legislative changes, and I think that the current government has heard that. So in around 2023, so 2023, they put out some recommendations, and they had a round table and said, look, we need to have a look at what's happening in the justice system, particularly for sexual violence, and how it's in the court system and in the justice system.
So for some reason they said, let's stop and have a review.
100%.
That's wonderful. Who was the agitator? How did that happen?
So I think that's come from the community and community groups, and probably people like yourselves listening. So they had a huge round table.
That's great.
And so this year they actually called for submissions to have a review of the policy changes and how we could improve the justice system. And I actually put in a submission to that, just because I believe so strongly that we need those changes. Kirsten, whether from our work or what we're hearing or from listening to people, I know you've had Adair Donaldson on recently, but it's something that I'm pretty driven about to see changes. We talked earlier about what's been happening in Europe, and I think they are definitely leading the way, and Australia could certainly learn a lot from the processes that have been happening, particularly in Spain, for example, where they've had a significant case that sort of caused outrage, where women marched in the streets, and that just paved the way for strong legislative changes, which I know are not perfect. I'm looking at the people in the room, but significant, that have created significant changes that are so positive for victims.
So my understanding is there was a case where a woman was sexually abused by a group of men.
100%, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and it was at a public event, and it was shocking what happened to her. And then I'm reading between the lines here that basically the system then wasn't in a solid enough position to do her justice, and it was poorly dealt with. Is that right?
Extremely poorly dealt with, and and that justice system failed the victim hugely.
Yeah.
I think the gentleman or the people involved, they didn't stay. Can we just edit that bit, because I haven't got it out correctly? But anyway, I think the outcomes were very poor. So they stood up and they marched, and from that, I think women stood up, policy advisors stood up, and they really created this change, and they implemented only yes means yes law. One of the things that do you want me to keep going?
Go.
Keep going. I feel so driven about it, because whilst it's not perfect, and there are loopholes, which is in the media everywhere, it actually has changed the whole system. When a woman goes to or presents to either a hospital or the police station, they are believed. And because to come back to exactly where you started from, there's this trauma-enforced or trauma-informed process from the word go, which just changes the whole process of how victims are treated within a system. And I think in Australia they are let down in that system, which is why we need to change it. So when you present to the police station, you're believed. You then present to a courtroom straight away and you have to share your story.
Is that right?
So whilst that sounds horrific, it actually is such an incredibly empowering process to present to a judge who is trauma-informed and understands, and you are believed.
That's profound, isn't it? Because the court system typically doesn't start with the premise of believing, does it? It's about, can you give enough evidence to prove that? And of course, a huge portion of sexual abuse happens behind closed doors, and they don't go, they're traumatised. So a lot of the behaviours are not conducive to getting that evidence. So, to presume that this is true and for them to be believed would be a complete culture shift.
Huge. So when you hear that system and the women who've had to do that, and it's so empowering because you stand there and you're presenting this story in a courtroom that's specific for women too, often, which is a difference and a huge change that we just don't have that here in Australia. It just shifts that whole narrative of how we see that courtroom and how we see that justice system.
So it's a specialised system.
100%. So that specialised courtroom for women, which whilst we're talking about sexual violence, but those courtrooms also are there for domestic violence. So I think that when you change those systems, it automatically changes outcomes. Even if you think of, because judges are trauma-informed, so they're coming from that totally different perspective, the flow and effect. We were talking about the police and the judges and how they're impacted. I think it just changes that whole process because we're thinking about it differently.
Yeah, definitely. And are you saying that this system is for not just sexual abuse but also domestic violence?
100%.
What about when I have a lot of men who are the recipient, the victim of domestic violence, and I've had a scatter of men who are the victim of sexual abuse? Not very often, but and that's, the twisted, tricky thing about that is therefore people don't believe it happens.
Yeah.
So what happens for the male victims?
Well, I'm sure those courtrooms would accommodate that because there's such a small group. I think they would naturally fit in those systems.
So
but
it's victims per se. It just happens to be predominantly women.
But it is that trauma-based approach. It's a streamlined approach. It's efficient, and I think that it just changes the outcome because women, or we're predominantly talking about women, but they already feel that they've been heard. So sometimes then, and and I know when I've worked with people, just sometimes just even standing there and sharing that story and being believed can be enough.
Absolutely. And the flip of that is when people go to court and they feel like they're not believed because they've got all of this, prosecution coming at them and questioning them and attacking them. That is incredibly traumatic, and they can come away not more damaged, but differently damaged from the court process.
100%.
So that's avoiding that trauma response, which is also why a lot of women don't report.
That's right. So something that I think I keep coming back to, but when you've got judges that are trauma-informed, it provides that seamless process. And in Spain, for example, they do a short study program. I think it's about 8 weeks over there, or part of their system that you can do to actually get that accreditation, or that whatever they're going to call it over there. So they're actually specific judges to do that. And I'd love to see that process here, where judges are specifically trained to have that trauma-based approach. whether it's a specialty within that judicial whatever with judges, but I think it just changes that outcome. And I think that you're right, it's actually just sharing it. Sometimes the outcome, I mean, we all might want certain outcomes for our clients or for our loved ones, but I think just that story and being believed is often enough.
And that trickles down as well. I've once I had 2 police come here, it just surprised me, from child CPIU, Child Protection Investigation Unit, and lovely people, and they came along and they said, I personally have got all of these clients who I get these child statements from with them disclosing sexual abuse, and they said, then we interview the same children and they don't talk to us, they shut down. And they came and they actually said to me, it was very humble, and they said to me, what do you do? How do you do it? What can we do? So they were seeking out education from a psychologist, and these are people who have been in the field forever, you know, they weren't newbies. And I just said to them, okay, come in, and they came in here, and I said, okay, first thing you do, take your tie off. Maybe wear casual clothes. I purposely, as you see me dressed now,
100%.
I always dress kind of very
relatable.
That's very
right,
relatable. And then I said, and the next thing you've got to do is sit on the floor with them. And they said, we can't sit on the floor with them. And I said, well, they're children. You have to get down to their level, and you have to bring your eye level potentially lower than theirs. So sometimes I even lie down on the ground, you know, at a distance from them, obviously, so that I'm lower and they're not feeling threatened by me. And they understood and heard what I was saying, but they hit a wall there and said, no, we just can't possibly do that. We must sit at a desk. We must, you know, formally do all of these things. And I said, well, that's fine, but if you want a child to talk to you, that's not going to happen. So it was kind of this whole concept of being trained, and this is their specialty, you know, child protection, that you need to be very, you know, refined in your skill set if you're going to have an optimal outcome in that field. So that's child sexual abuse. That's very much my field. But, you know, then you think, well, when women come and they disclose sexual abuse to the police, what's the process? How responsive are they? How trained are they in that? And, you know, it starts from the police all the way through to the criminal
100%.
system.
So imagine if we were able to get those legislative changes through where that trauma-informed process, even with our police force, it just changes that whole, the way we think about things, the outcome, even how the police officers feel, because obviously they feel quite distressed that they can't get the outcomes that they want, and they know they've got those outcomes. So I think it's actually just bringing it back to those simple processes. That's what we can actually do as politicians, is listen. I mean, you've just exactly stated what we need to be doing within those legislative changes. It doesn't, so when they'd be so, I mean, we're going down to advocate for them. I think that it would just have such a good outcome, and we would see that outcome with police, we would see that outcome flow through. Yeah.
And you can see that they've made improvement with child justice, where now children don't go to the courtroom. Now children are in a separate room. They now have a support person.
100%.
They're restricted so they don't see the perpetrator on the screen. So there's been a lot of improvement. So you can see that there's an intention.
So that is something that drives, I'm driven to see change. I think it's possible. I think people are listening to experts like yourselves. And the thing that I would love to add in, which I will always do, is that in the regions, because we're limited with resources, we always have to make sure that funding always comes to the regions to make sure we are adequately resourced. So we're not left out, so we're not inundated. And we do have those specialty sort of places here, which would be tremendous.
Absolutely. And with wanting to make these changes, how does it work when, you know, absolutely in the future when you're representing Groom and, you know, you're representing Groom, but these changes would have to be on a state level. So how does that work?
So the changes that I've been working with have been at federal
level.
Yeah,
of course,
no,
which then helps 100%. Everyone. Okay, I'm with you. Yep,
which is great. But you've raised a really good issue, because it's something I have been thinking about the role of a good representative is actually to work across all levels of government.
Right.
So it's a really interesting topic because we tend to see it in silos, that this is state, this is, council, and this is federal. But actually the role of a good federal member is to work across all of those levels of government together to create the change that we want to see. So we are an advocate, but we're also collaborating with all those levels to create those changes. So we can implement these at a federal level. So then it would be working at a state level to say, look, we've done this federally, what can we do within the state? Who've done some incredible things actually at a state level, particularly of late, around consent and all sorts of things. But that's, certainly it's how you can weave and work within those three levels to create that positive outcome.
And a lot of that's education, isn't it? I mean, you're educating me now about, where the change injection comes from and how it has an impact on the country. But to communicate with people that's how change is made.
It's huge. If you look at the role of a federal member, that role is to advocate for community, is to hold government account around the budget and money. It's also to work within those levels of government to say, right, well, if council needs this, how can we work with state and federal to bring in funding for that region or whatever that is? So that is your role, actually. And I think because we have those beautiful skills of negotiation and collaboration, of advocacy, which we've all been trained, and what we've done naturally, I think it lends itself beautifully for that role, which is what I love most, is actually to say, right, how can we do this better? What can we do? Put party politics aside. So how can we actually get the best for our outcome? With the soils, to come back, I know it's really funny that we've talked from soils to domestic violence, but it's all around legislation. It's all about change, and it's all around listening to community. We actually enabled the farmers out there to go and present to the local government, and they got a really good outcome. So that's actually empowering.
Giving them a voice.
Yep. So your role is not to do it for them either. Sometimes it's actually to provide the door to open it and then elevate those people to be empowered, to use their voices. You're just there to assist that process, which is really lovely because they've created the change. It's like if I get elected in next year, you know what, I'm going to just say it straight up, you and I go down to Canberra, you've got that skill set, we've got enough connections here, we've been working with people for a long time to create those changes. We get a task force together and we go down, we say, you know what, we've got the solutions for Groom, we've been listening to people up here, we know the answers, how can we do this?
Love it, absolutely. Oh, darling. Look, I cannot thank you enough for coming along and doing this podcast. And I've just loved getting into all the corners here.
It's been wonderful. Will we do it again?
Absolutely.
I love talking. We could just do this.
And can I just say, and this is going to sound so cliche, but often cliches are true, have you noticed? The world needs people like you because you're someone who thinks big, and you need to be able to sit back and look at the broad picture, to look critically at a situation rather than just accept it, and then to come down to the nuance and the detail. And I really love that you facilitate reaching for people who do have such a wonderful skill set and bringing them to the fore to facilitate people to advocating for them. It's there's certain personalities that are pioneers, and you're one of them.
Well,
so thank you,
and I look forward to working together because we're very similar, and I think we're just taking that next level and taking it to Canberra. So
let's go. Let's go.
For it. Thank you so much. It's been a privilege, and to work, to listen and talk with you.
Yeah, we'll do it again.
Let's do it again. Thank you.
And if anyone wants to catch me online, we've got the website with a million resources on it, KirstenHunterAuthor.com, Facebook and Instagram, Kirsten Hunter Author. Thanks so much, everybody.